Maggie is interested in environmental and ecological research, primarily that focusing on marine and coastal ecosystems. She interned this past summer on a remote island off of Vancouver Island, where she studied gray whales, analyzing prey-predator interactions, population structure, and human impacts based on spatial and temporal scales. This semester, Maggie was named part of the Campus to Congress Fellowship, a leadership community that focuses on introducing sustainability into business and politics. She is continuing her environmental research by participating in an undergraduate ecology lab that studies multiple aspects of milkweed plants and monarch butterflies. Welcome, Maggie.
Hi guys, thanks for coming out today and listening. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the climate crisis that's currently going on and how it affects some different species. So currently the Maldives, their government is looking to buy land, not for any imperialist reasons, not to open new trade routes or for any political motive. They're looking to buy land so that their future generations will have somewhere to live. So the Maldives are a series of islands that comprise one of the lowest lying countries in the world. The average distance above sea level is only about 5 feet. So this means that they're going to be one of the countries that really feels those adverse effects of climate change. One of these effects are rising sea levels. And so if sea levels rise 2, 4, 6 feet, the Maldives are going to be underwater. They're going to be flooded. An entire civilization, a culture, gone. Now, sometimes that's really hard to comprehend because it's somewhere that we're so removed from. We're not there. We can't experience what they're going through. But we can see how there's other effects of climate change that are happening around us that we can relate to right now. Things such as Hurricane Sandy, which a lot of us probably felt the effects from, or the typhoon that just hit the Philippines. A lot of climate scientists and researchers agree that these more extreme weather events are being caused by this global temperature rise. And this global temperature rise is being caused by the excess carbon that's in the atmosphere. So by 2100, a lot of scientists agree that places like the Maldives will be underwater. That by 2100, these extreme weather events will be occurring much more often. They'll happen all the time. And that's not something that we want to deal with. And it's hard to face that harsh reality. It's hard to understand that in a mere 85 years, things like this could be occurring everywhere. But for me, I found something that I could relate to a little more. And that was some of the research that I did this past summer off of Vancouver Island. We were on this little place called Flores Island. It was a 45-minute boat ride away from any cell phone service, internet connection. We were completely isolated. And because we were so remote, we were in this environment that was just so untouched and unspoiled by humans. Or so I thought. But I'll get back to that idea later. So what I did in Canada was work at the Whale Research Lab, which is that nice little red building. And we were on an island. There were only 7 of us there. It was pretty small. And our focus was on gray whales. And we looked at different aspects of these gray whales in relation to different temporal and spatial scales. Just meaning that we looked at the behaviors and the population structure of the whales in different areas throughout different times. So gray whales are these enormous and beautiful creatures. They can grow to be over 50 feet long and weigh more than 30 tons. We were able to identify individual whales based upon their markings, which you can kind of see those white spots on there, and some of the different scars that they obtained over their lifetime. Additionally, they have what are called dorsal knuckles, which you can see are those ridges just in the back of the whale. So if you think of other cetaceans, like dolphins or killer whales that have those big dorsal fins, gray whales lack that, and instead they just have these knuckles. So here's a few more pictures of some of the whales that we saw next to our boats. Jose is the one on the top right, and this one is Dasher on the bottom left. So we were able to identify those individually. So gray whales live according to a migratory schedule, meaning that in the cold winter months, they migrate south to Southern California, and northern Mexico in order to breed and give birth. And then whenever the warm summer months start to come, they go back up north in order to feed and replenish the blubber that they use as an energy source for the remainder of that year. So this is where we can first see one of the effects of climate change on the population of gray whales. What global warming is doing is causing the seasons of summer and winter to become longer, and we're losing that intermediate spring and autumn period. If this happens, the gray whales might miss those environmental cues to migrate. For example, if they aren't feeling that colder weather as quickly as they should, then they're going to miss heading south and miss those breeding periods or giving birth to their young in those warm, protected waters. Additionally, if they miss the cue to start heading up north, then they're going to miss out on the prime feeding times, and they might starve. So we can see that both of these will lead to population loss in the gray whales. The other thing that we were researching up at the Whale Lab was the relationship between the gray whales and their primary food source, which are called mysids. So mysids are just these small little crustaceans. They just kind of look like miniature shrimp. And so we looked at that relationship between the gray whales and these mysids. So whenever the gray whales go up north, they eat tons and tons of these mysids because, as you can imagine, this is a 50 or 60-foot whale consuming a little shrimp that's less than half an inch long. So they eat tons of these. So what we did in order to analyze this relationship was something called plankton netting. This is simply putting a net in the water behind the boat and just dragging it for a couple, like maybe 20 seconds or so. And you collect the sample, which are normally mysids, or as this picture shows, it's a jellyfish in the middle of eating some mysids. So what we did is we would take all these mysids that we collected, we'd bring them back, we would measure them, determine their species, and other data such as that. And what we found was whenever we went to areas and did this plankton netting where there were 5 or 6 whales feeding, we would get a ton of mysids in the net. But whenever we'd go to areas where there would be no whales or perhaps only 1 whale feeding the area, we'd have a minimal number of mysids in those nets. So it was obvious that there was a direct correlation between the presence of mysids and the presence of the whales. So you might be wondering at this point, how does this relationship have anything to do with climate change? Well, like I said before, whenever the whales come up north, they just absolutely obliterate the population of mysids because they consume so many of them. So what the mysids need to do is during those cold winter months, whenever the whales are down south, they have to repopulate. And mysids require this kind of cooler environment, colder waters, in order to reproduce and thrive effectively and efficiently. And if they don't have this, then they're not going to be able to recover from the consumption by the whales. So what happens is if these waters are starting to warm, if carbon emissions are still going to continue to rise and global temperature rises, then the ocean waters are going to rise in temperature as well. And if that happens, the space in which the mysids can feed and their habitat is going to decrease to be a smaller and smaller area. And if this happens, the mysid population is going to decrease. There's going to be increased competition between those. And then whenever the whales come back up north to feed, there's going to be less food sources for them, meaning that the whale populations are going to be in more competition with one another, leading to starvation of some of those whales and eventual population loss. Now, this isn't just one singular relationship. Climate change won't just affect these 2 species, but instead it will affect that whole food web. So we can see that there's a lot of animals involved. This is a very simple food web, but there's so many different species involved in this relationship. So killer whales, for example, prey upon gray whales. And if the gray whales are dying in their population, then killer whales are going to suffer. Additionally, if the mysid population decreases because the ocean waters are rising in temperature, then the fish that eat those are going to have population loss. And the salmon that eat those fish are going to have population loss. Then we move to the terrestrial animals. Wolves and bears that rely on salmon as their primary food source are going to suffer as well. So we can see how one small disruption in a food web, which seemingly seems so unimportant, actually can affect a whole lot of species. And the same kind of thing would happen with humans if we lose some of our resources. If coastal flooding occurs, if we have these floods, these more extreme weather events, then humans are going to use land. We're going to lose areas that we use to grow food. We're going to lose a lot of resources, and we're going to be in competition with one another. And by 2100, if the human population does reach the predicted 9 or 10 billion people, how are we going to support everybody? How are we going to ensure that there will always be whales off of Flores Island? How are we going to protect our environment from these irreversible changes? Well, unfortunately, there's not one answer. But it really all comes down to making changes. We can make big changes and we can make small changes. Small changes can be something as simple as using a reusable bag whenever you go grocery shopping, or maybe just taking a little bit of a shorter shower. And these are all really great things. They have positive effects on the environment. But unfortunately, if this is all we do to change, it's not going to be enough. Carbon emissions are going to continue to rise, and climate chaos will ensue. But there is one big change that we can make. There's one big thing that we can do to ensure that carbon emissions will be stabilized, and hopefully we can get down to that 350 parts per million instead of the 400 we're at now. And that is to end the use of fossil fuels. Now, it's not something that's going to happen today or tomorrow, but it's something that can happen soon. It's something that we can really drive our governments and our local communities to start doing. But sometimes it seems like a bit of a daunting task, right? We have these enormous fossil fuel companies that have so much power and so many things in reserves that they're going to want to use. But there is a campaign that's going on now. It's a divestment campaign. Oh, and this too. So the divestment campaign kind of uses this as a base. We know that fossil fuel consumption and temperature rise are directly correlated. You can see it in this graph. So what this divestment campaign is doing, it's the same kind of campaign that was used against tobacco and to end apartheid in South Africa. But here, divestment is referring to taking investments out of fossil fuel companies and instead placing them in any other company, maybe a green or sustainable energy company. And while this doesn't directly affect those fossil fuel companies financially, what it does is takes away some of their political power and their moral standing. Because if we have companies that are kind of helping to drive this flooding of the Maldives, this loss of biodiversity, people aren't going to want to be associated with that. They're not going to want to pay for those kinds of things. So here on campus, we have a group that does that, BC Fossil Free, which I'm part of. And we are working along with a lot of other schools around the nation to get colleges to divest their endowment money from fossil fuel companies. And if we do this, then we can really help to take away that power of these fossil fuel companies and ensure that our environment can be protected. So if we divest, if we take away these fossil fuels, or slowly wean ourselves off the use of them and go to these other alternative energy sources, we're going to avoid things like this. The Earth is already heated up to about 1 degree Celsius, more than it's ever been in the past. And if it gets to 2 degrees Celsius, we can see what's going to happen to those ocean environments, 3 degrees Celsius. It's not really that pretty to look at. So if we divest, we can protect these ocean environments. If we divest, we can ensure that our environment will always be there, that we can stabilize these carbon emissions and return the Earth to a natural state. If we divest, we might just be able to save the whales. We might just be able to save the Maldives, and we might just be able to save our futures. Thank you.